On a golden June afternoon, the village of Netherdean was at its most charming. Hollyhocks and delphiniums reached skyward in every garden, their hues vivid beneath the lazy sun. Children's laughter drifted from the green, mingling with the gentle clink of teacups and the cheerful crackle of bunting flapping in the breeze. The rectory garden, freshly trimmed and immaculately arranged by Mrs. Hargreaves, was host to the annual summer fete, a tradition as English as rhubarb crumble and as fixed in the village calendar as harvest festival. Miss Jane Marple, in a straw hat adorned with pale blue ribbon, sat beneath the shade of a white parasol. Her knitting needles clicked rhythmically in her lap as her eyes, bright and bird-like, surveyed the gathering. She noted that Reverend Hargreaves was losing patience with the vicarage Labrador, which had taken to chasing a child's red balloon, and that Colonel Arbuthnot had refilled his glass of elderflower wine 3 times, despite declaring he didn't care for the stuff. The true source of the day's interest, however, was neither cake nor croquet. It was the guest of honor, Mr. Hugo Hawthorne, the acclaimed novelist turned television clairvoyant, whose most recent book, Whispers of Tomorrow, had made him a household name. He had been invited, rather proudly, by Mrs. Hargreaves herself, having read in the Church Times that he owned a cottage nearby. Hugo was tall, tanned and urbane, with silver-streaked hair and a manner that suggested he could see straight through a person's soul, or at least make them believe he could. "Charming village," Hugo said, sipping lemon cordial. "Though, I confess I felt something. Curious upon entering, a shift in the air, as if the future had already passed through here, leaving something behind." Miss Marple glanced up from her knitting. "Oh? What sort of something, Mr. Hawthorne?" Turned his smile to her, mildly patronizing. "Oh, you know, an echo, a presence, a tangle in time, nothing to trouble ourselves with." "Well," said Miss Marple pleasantly, "the village does have its tangles, a great many, in fact, mostly involving rose trellises and misremembered invitations." There was a ripple of laughter nearby. Mrs. Hargreaves beamed. She adored Hugo's mystique and had already decided he would be the toast of every committee meeting for the next 6 months. But not everyone was equally charmed. Nora Bradbury, the schoolmistress, muttered to her sister behind a lace fan that Mr. Hawthorne gave her the shivers. Young Tom Herrick, whose hair always looked as though he'd been leaning out of a motor car, snorted and said, "If he can really see the future, he might warn old Dicker that the cake tent's about to collapse." Which, a moment later, it nearly did. Miss Marple noticed all this. She also noticed that Hugo had not touched the iced sponge cake served to him, though he'd claimed sponge was his weakness, and that while he listened to compliments with grace, he appeared to grow faintly bored when anyone praised his writing, but leaned forward, intensely focused, when asked about his predictions. Then, as the sun drifted lower and the air turned soft and golden, Hugo rose to deliver an impromptu speech beside the hydrangeas. The small crowd quieted, expectant. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for your warmth. I must say, I sense a strong energy in this place, and, though I know some will laugh, I feel compelled to offer a small forewarning." There were titters of amusement. Miss Marple, pausing in her knitting, studied his face. "In this very village," Hugo continued, his voice lowering, "something will occur, soon. Something irreversible. A moment that will split the path of time. I do not say this to frighten you, only to urge vigilance." A rustle passed through the guests. Some chuckled nervously. Colonel Arbuthnot muttered, "Rot," into his drink. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Hugo's tone was not one of mere theatrics. It was calm, almost resigned. Later that evening, after the fete had ended, and the villagers wandered home with sunburned noses and baskets of half-eaten scones, something indeed occurred. The next morning, Hugo Hawthorne was found dead in his cottage, seated, Upright in his study chair, his pen dropped to the floor. The door had been locked from the inside, and beside him, on the desk, lay a single page torn from his notebook. On it, in elegant ink, he had written just 5 words. It has already come. True. Miss Marple, reading this note an hour later at the request of Inspector Cray, lifted a gloved hand to her lips, her gaze drifting toward the window. The future, it seemed, had paid Nether Dean a visit after all. The village of Nether Dean stirred. Early the next morning, as it always did, milk bottles clinked on doorsteps, the postman's bicycle wobbled over gravel, and birds called lazily from gabled rooftops. But beneath the usual rhythms, something was different. A current of unease, soft but insistent, pulsed through the village like a second heartbeat. Word had spread swiftly, as such things do in villages. By 7:30, Mrs. Pendle at the greengrocer's had heard it from her lodger, who claimed to have passed Constable Matthews outside Hawthorne Cottage, looking unusually grim. By 8, the news reached the vicarage, delivered with theatrical shudders by young Nancy Rigby, who'd heard from her cousin's wife that Mr. Hawthorne had died in his armchair, like something from one of his own books. By 8:30, Colonel Arbuthnot announced to his barber that he'd suspected something queer about the man from the very beginning. And by 9 o'clock, the entire village was abuzz. Miss Marple, however, had not heard through gossip. She had been informed by Inspector Cray himself, a tall, heavy-set man with a grave disposition and a habit of speaking in slow, considered sentences. She had been enjoying her morning tea when he arrived, hat in hand, his expression lined with worry. "We found him just before 7, he told her. His housekeeper, Mrs. Weaver, couldn't get in. Door locked from the inside, blinds drawn. She called the station. Miss Marple had nodded gently. And the note? Cray's eyebrows twitched. Yes, strange thing that. It's certainly his handwriting. No signs of forced entry, no marks on the body. Dr. Kellett says the heart simply stopped. Natural causes. Except, Miss Marple, I'm not sure I believe that. No, she said, folding her napkin with a small sigh. Nor do I. Now, at just past 11, Miss Marple found herself standing outside Hawthorne Cottage, the June sun casting long shadows on the gravel path. The house was a pretty, low-built structure set back from the lane, surrounded by thick hedges and early summer roses. A curious air hung about it, not quite solemn but not at peace either. Miss Marple took this in with a glance, then made her way to the open door. Inside, Inspector Cray was conferring with Sergeant Thorne beside the study. A constable hovered by the back door, his boots leaving faint scuffs on the polished floorboards. The house was neat, almost obsessively so. Every cushion aligned, every book straight. Miss Marple noticed the faint scent of lavender and old paper. Cray turned as she entered. Thank you for coming. I thought I might be of quiet use, Miss Marple said. You know how often the details of life, who visits whom and why, tend to make their way to my ears quite without effort. He offered a faint smile. Yes, I do know that. She moved slowly through the hall, her gaze lingering on the umbrella stand, the row of postcards clipped neatly above the radiator, scenes of exotic places, Cairo, Istanbul, New York, a life that had stretched far from Nether Dean, it seemed. She entered the study. The room was filled with soft morning light. A high-backed armchair sat before a writing desk, facing the window. It was here that Hugo Hawthorne had been found. His eyes closed, a faint expression of surprise on his face, though not fear. The notebook page still lay on the desk, preserved precisely where it had been. Miss Marple approached and read the line again. It has already come true. Was anything missing? She asked softly. No, Cray said. No sign of a struggle. Nothing out of place. The housekeeper says he was in good health yesterday. He took an early walk, wrote for a few hours, then came to the fete. Seemed perfectly well. Miss Marple nodded. And the doors were all locked? Front and back, windows too, no tampering, keys still inside. A locked room death, then. Cray exhaled through his nose. Yes, one of those blasted puzzles. I don't like puzzles. Life is made up of them, Inspector. Especially in villages. She turned to the bookshelf. Rows of hardbacks in gleaming dust jackets, most by Hawthorne himself. But there, tucked beside a biography of Tennyson, was something curious. A slim, leather-bound volume, its spine blank. Miss Marple drew it out carefully and opened it. Inside were pages of jotted notes, some passages of prose, some barely legible, thoughts. But halfway through she paused. I found it in the hedgerow, one entry read. A charm, perhaps, or a warning. A small metal disc etched with the number 13, tossed aside but not forgotten. I shall keep it. She turned another page. They think I don't know, but I do. The past has teeth. Some here would rather I hadn't returned. Miss Marple looked up. Did he speak of any enemies? Cray shook his head. Not a soul. Polite, courteous, friendly enough, though a bit aloof. I believe he was frightened, she said quietly. He gave the impression yesterday of someone trying to hide behind performance. But underneath, she drifted to the window. The view overlooked the village green in the distance, and beyond that, the crooked lane that led toward the edge of Nether Dean. Her eyes narrowed. Who found the body? The housekeeper. She arrives at 7, has a key. When he didn't answer, she called us. We opened the door. Ah, but I wonder, Miss Marple said, what he expected to happen between the fete and this morning. That note, he must have written it late. The pen had fallen, ink still damp when found. He meant it as a last message. Cray frowned. A prediction, or a confirmation? She let the silence linger before asking, was anything unusual found on the grounds? Cray gestured to Thorne, who left briefly and returned with a small evidence pouch. Inside was a dull metal disc, no larger than a shilling. Etched into its surface was a crude number, 13. We found this behind the cottage wall, half buried. Likely nothing. But odd, all the same. Miss Marple nodded once. Yes, odd, and perhaps important. She tucked a gloved finger under her chin and turned back to the room. That evening, as dusk softened the rooftops of Nether Dean, the gossip resumed in earnest. Mrs. Hargreaves insisted Mr. Hawthorne must have died from natural causes. All that aura business must take a toll on the heart. Colonel Arbuthnot dismissed the entire thing as melodramatic nonsense, while schoolmistress Nora Bradbury leaned in close to whisper that she'd always said there was something unsettling about a man who could predict the future but hadn't foreseen his own death. But Miss Marple, sitting in her rose-scented sitting room with her embroidery untouched in her lap, did not think the death was natural, nor was it merely curious. She believed Hugo Hawthorne had known what was coming, and someone in Nether Dean had known it too. As she reached to switch off the lamp, her eyes settled on her bookshelf, where a copy of Whispers of Tomorrow now stood, a recent gift from Mrs. Hargreaves. Miss Marple rose and opened the book, flipping through pages of fictional premonitions and dark portents until she found what she was looking for. A passage, faintly underlined in pencil. The secret is never in the death. It is in what came before and who feared its return. Her lips pursed. Outside, the wind stirred the hedges. Somewhere, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Tomorrow she would begin asking questions, and she already had an idea of who might fear them most. The following morning brought a slow, humid drizzle to Nether Dean. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet grass and damp brick, and the village seemed subdued, as if the earth itself had paused to listen more closely. Miss Marple, however, was up before the bells of St. Luke's had finished their first chime, sipping her tea with a calm deliberateness that belied her racing thoughts. She had made a list in her notebook, just a few names, not suspects, not yet. but people who, in her estimation, had spent a little too long watching Mr. Hawthorne's cottage when they thought no one noticed. People who had lingered near the tea table after the author's cryptic speech, not laughing as much as the others, or laughing too much. Her first visit was to the vicarage. The Reverend Pottle was a soft-spoken man, with an endearing habit of apologizing before he even opened the door. He led her to the sitting room, where a modest fire crackled despite the season, and his wife Edith poured tea into mismatched porcelain cups. "We're still quite shaken," Mrs. Pottle confessed, offering Miss Marple a shortbread biscuit. "He seemed so very composed, didn't he, at the fete? Did he say anything peculiar to either of you before his little speech?" Miss Marple asked, her tone perfectly casual. The vicar frowned slightly. "He asked me for an old parish map, of all things. Said he wanted to walk some of the boundaries he remembered as a boy. That was a week ago, I believe. I didn't think much of it. He was always one for long walks." Miss Marple sipped her tea. "Was he troubled, do you think?" Mrs. Pottle exchanged a glance with her husband. "Not obviously, no. But there was something reflective about him. I remember him standing by the old chestnut tree for a long while last Thursday, just standing there staring up, like someone remembering something they'd rather forget." Miss Marple filed that away. She knew the tree well, an ancient, twisted thing that stood alone at the northern edge of the village. And she also knew the local story attached to it, a long-ago scandal involving a missing girl, a stolen heirloom, and an unfortunate boy blamed too swiftly. "I do wonder," she said gently, "if Mr. Hawthorne's stories were more autobiographical than we gave him credit for." The vicar raised an eyebrow. "He certainly mined the village for inspiration. I dare say a few folk will be uneasy, wondering what he might have revealed with that last book of his." "Yes," Miss Marple murmured, "the one he hadn't quite finished." From the vicarage, she made her way to the post office, where Miss Geraldine Hartley presided with a quiet efficiency and a firm grip on every whisper that passed through the village. Geraldine was not one to exaggerate or embellish. Her observations were sharp, her delivery plain. He'd been receiving parcels from London. Brown paper, no return address. Started arriving about a month ago. One a week, always on Thursdays. "Books?" Miss Marple asked. Geraldine shrugged. "Couldn't say. He came to collect them himself, said they were reference materials. But I thought he seemed unsettled after opening the last one, dropped it on the floor and just stared at it for a while." Miss Marple's expression remained mild. "Did anyone else know about these parcels?" "Only me and Clive Burrows. He works the late shift, does the sorting. But Clive's more interested in the football pools than village intrigue." Miss Marple nodded her thanks and stepped back out into the mist. The thought circled her mind, like a cautious bird. Someone had sent Mr. Hawthorne something disturbing, something that reached into the past. And now he was dead. Peacefully, yes, but with a message that said more than most realized. Her third visit took her to Mrs. Augusta, Hargreaves's drawing room. The woman was swaddled in silk and scent, as always, and had clearly spent the morning cultivating the appearance of effortless grief. "It's all terribly sad, Jane," she said, patting her silver hair. "He was quite a character, and I dare say he brought a touch of class to our little corner of the world. You gave him the book," Miss Marple said, smiling gently. Augusta blinked. "What book?" "Whispers of Tomorrow. I saw your name inscribed inside." "A gift." "Oh, that." Her hand fluttered. "Yes, I thought it might inspire him. I've always believed in the intuitive arts, you know. I had a reading once, quite a good one. Said I'd live to 97 and outlive 2 husbands. Miss Marple tilted her head slightly. "Did Hugo Hawthorne believe in such things, do you think?" "I wouldn't say so," Augusta said, her eyes narrowing with recollection. "But he had a fascination with fate. Used to say some events echo down through time, just waiting to be heard again. Did he mention the past much? He mentioned someone named Lydia once, she said after a pause, drifted off for a moment while we were discussing the fete arrangements. Just said her name. Lydia. And then he looked, I don't know, distant. Miss Marple rose, her interest piqued. Did you ask who she was? No, Augusta replied. But now that I think of it, it rang a bell. There was a Lydia who disappeared years ago, wasn't there? Before your time back in the village. I remember her, Miss Marple said softly. Lydia Tasker vanished one summer's night. People said she ran off to London. Others believed otherwise. That was near the old chestnut tree, wasn't it? Yes, Miss Marple said, turning to go. Yes, it was. That evening, with the mist still curling in the hedgerows and the gas lamps glowing faintly golden through the gloom, Miss Marple walked to the base of the chestnut tree. Its bark was gnarled and split like the face of some ancient sentinel. The ground beneath was still damp from the morning's rain. She stooped and examined the base. It took some time, but she found it at last, a patch of disturbed earth, carefully refilled. She fetched her small garden trowel, which she had carried in her handbag for just such an occasion, and dug gently. The object she retrieved was tarnished and round. Another disc, identical to the one found behind Hawthorne's cottage, etched with the same crude number, 13. Her breath clouded in the cool air. There was a pattern forming, a thread winding through the village that connected past and present, fiction and fact. Hugo Hawthorne had known something. More than that, he had been preparing to reveal it. But someone had made sure he wouldn't. Miss Marple straightened and looked back toward the village, now just a series of glimmers behind the veil of mist. The people there carried secrets, layers upon layers, as neatly folded as the linens in their cupboards. And someone, quite possibly someone everyone trusted, had decided to act before those secrets could be exposed. She walked home slowly, the disc warm in her hand from the friction of the soil. When she reached her gate, she paused. A small envelope was tucked just inside her letterbox. No name, no stamp, just a folded piece of cream paper. She opened it carefully. There were only 4 words, written in block capitals. Leave it alone, Miss Marple. She stood very still, letting the evening wind toy with her scarf. Then she smiled faintly, folded the paper in 2, and placed it beside the disc on her mantel. They had made the classic mistake, she thought. They had told her not to investigate, which meant, of course, that she absolutely would. The next morning, Miss Marple found herself reflecting on the warning slipped into her letterbox. She was not easily deterred by threats. Years of village life had taught her that fear was a poor companion to the pursuit of truth. With her usual gentle determination, she set about assembling the fragments of this strange puzzle. Her first visit was to Clive Burrows, the post office assistant who had mentioned the parcel sent to Hugo Hawthorne. Clive was a broad-shouldered young man with a shock of unruly hair and a fondness for football that seemed to occupy most of his thoughts. When Miss Marple entered the cluttered sorting room, she found him engrossed in a newspaper. "Good morning, Clive," she said warmly. "I wonder if you might indulge an old lady's curiosity." He looked up, surprised but pleased. "Of course, Mrs. Marple. What can I do for you?" "It's about the parcels Hugo was receiving," she began carefully. "You said they arrived weekly, each Thursday." "Yes, every Thursday for the past month," Clive confirmed. "Brown paper, no markings." He always came to pick them up himself, never asked for anyone else to sign. "Did you ever see what was inside?" He hesitated. "Once, a glimpse. I was sorting through the deliveries when he opened one right there by the counter. It looked like papers, some old documents maybe." He took them and shut the parcel up quick. but he dropped one sheet on the floor. I picked it up and saw what looked like an old map. A map, Miss Marple repeated thoughtfully. Did it resemble any local landmarks? Clive shrugged. Hard to say. I'm no expert. But I do remember the paper was yellowed like it had been kept for years. Miss Marple nodded. Thank you, Clive. That helps. From the post office, she walked toward the village library, a small but well-kept building that also served as the repository of local history. Miss Marple felt the need to understand the past, especially the shadow cast by Lydia Tasker's disappearance. Inside, she found Mr. Felix Crandall, the librarian, perched on a ladder, dusting the upper shelves. He was a thin man with spectacles that always seemed to slide down his nose and a tendency to speak in a precise, deliberate manner. "Good morning, Mr. Crandall," she called softly. "I'm looking for any information you might have on the Tasker family." He descended carefully and adjusted his glasses. "Ah, the Taskers. A well-known family once, though they have since faded into obscurity. Lydia's disappearance was quite the scandal, still talked about in hushed tones. Do you have records or newspapers from that time?" "Indeed, I can show you." He led her to a glass case displaying yellowed clippings and a ledger with handwritten notes. Miss Marple examined the articles carefully. Lydia Tasker was last seen at a village dance, after which she vanished without a trace. Theories abounded. Some whispered she ran off with a lover. Others feared a more sinister fate. No evidence ever surfaced, and the case remained officially unsolved. "What about the old chestnut tree?" Miss Marple asked, recalling the earlier mention. Mr. Crandall nodded. "It was near where Lydia was last seen. Local law claims the tree has a kind of curse, that it witnessed secrets no one dared to uncover." Miss Marple ran her fingers over the brittle paper. Curious how such legends persist even when evidence is lacking. "Indeed," Mr. Crandall agreed, "and yet sometimes legends contain fragments of truth." She left the library with the ledger tucked under her arm. The past was speaking, if only one knew how to listen. Returning home, she placed the ledger on her table alongside the mysterious discs. The number 13 stood out, a symbol repeated in the past and present. Why 13? It seemed more than coincidence. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Constable Harris, a young officer new to Netherdean but eager to please. "Mrs. Marple, the village is abuzz with talk about the late Mr. Hawthorne. The police are following up on leads, but we've hit a wall." "Do you have a list of visitors to the fete?" Miss Marple inquired. "Yes, and I understand you've been speaking to some of the locals." She smiled. "I have. But you must forgive me. I tend to see patterns where others see only chaos." The constable chuckled. "That's why we keep you close, Mrs. Marple." As he left, she pondered the strange parcels again. If they contained old maps or documents, could they relate to the village's buried secrets? And what of Lydia Tasker's fate? Was it possible that Hugo Hawthorne's research had brushed against a truth someone wanted hidden? That afternoon, Miss Marple visited Mrs. Edith Pottle once more. This time, she asked more pointed questions about the people at the fete. Mrs. Pottle was hesitant, but finally confessed her suspicions. There was a man, Mr. Claremont, the new owner of the mill. He was unusually quiet that day, watching Hugo, more than anyone else. They had a history, I believe. Do you know what kind of history? No, only rumors. Something about a business deal gone wrong years ago. I've heard whispers that Hawthorne planned to expose it in his new book. Miss Marple's interest deepened. And Mr. Claremont, was he present when Hugo was found? Yes. In fact, he was one of the last people to see him alive, or so I hear. Thanking Mrs. Pottle, Miss Marple decided it was time to meet Mr. Claremont herself. She found him at the mill, a large, imposing structure on the edge of the village. Arthur Claremont was a man in his late 50s, with sharp features and eyes that missed little. He greeted her cordially but with a guarded reserve. "Miss Marple," he said, "I hear you've been asking questions about my involvement with Mr. Hawthorne. I assure you, I had nothing to do with his death." "I have no such assumption," she replied. "But I am curious about your relationship. The villagers suggest a past disagreement." He sighed and motioned for her to sit in the office, where the light was muted and dust motes danced in the beams from a high window. "Years ago, Hugo and I were partners in a venture that went awry. He accused me of dishonesty, and I accused him of folly. We parted bitterly, and I admit I've held a grudge. But I would never harm him." "Did he threaten to reveal anything damaging about you?" "He hinted at a revelation, yes. But I never took it seriously. Hugo was prone to dramatics. Miss Marple studied him carefully." "And the parcels?" "Never heard of them," Claremont said sharply. "Perhaps you might tell me about the night Lydia Tasker disappeared. Any connection to the mill or your family?" Claremont's face darkened. "I don't discuss old village gossip." Miss Marple smiled gently. "I understand. But sometimes the past has a way of surfacing, whether we like it or not." Leaving the mill, Miss Marple considered Claremont's defensiveness. Was it guilt, or merely the wounded pride of a man who had lost more than money? That evening, as the village settled under a blanket of stars, she sat by her fire and reviewed her notes. The discs marked 13, the parcels with maps, the old scandal of Lydia Tasker, the bitter feud between Hawthorne and Claremont, all were threads woven into a tapestry more intricate than it first appeared. And somewhere within that tapestry was the answer she sought. Her phone buzzed softly. It was a message from Geraldine Hartley at the post office. "Come see me tomorrow. Found something you need to know." Miss Marple smiled to herself. The game was afoot once more. The morning sun cast a soft glow over Netherdean as Miss Marple made her way back to the post office. The village was stirring, the quiet murmurs of daily life barely masking the undercurrent of unease that had settled since Hugo Hawthorne's death. Miss Marple felt the weight of that unease as she approached the familiar red brick building, wondering what new revelation awaited her inside. Geraldine Hartley was waiting behind the counter, her usually cheerful expression tinged with a hint of seriousness. She beckoned Miss Marple over, holding a small, neatly wrapped package. "I thought you should see this," Geraldine said quietly, placing the parcel gently on the counter. "It came in the post yesterday, addressed to Hugo, but it was never collected." Miss Marple examined the package closely. It was wrapped in the same plain brown paper as the parcels Clive had mentioned, without any markings or stamps aside from the faded postal cancellation. She carefully untied the string and peeled back the paper to reveal a stack of old letters tied with a brittle ribbon. "These look very old," she murmured, running her fingers over the fragile edges. "Are they from the Tasker family?" Geraldine nodded. "They were found among other deliveries that Hugo received. I didn't think much of them at first, but then I remembered your interest in Lydia Tasker." Miss Marple's eyes brightened. "May I?" Geraldine handed her the bundle, and Miss Marple began to read the first letter aloud in her mind. The handwriting was elegant, but hurried, penned in a flowing script that spoke of urgency and fear. "My dearest Lydia," it began, "the danger that shadows our family grows heavier each day. We must speak in person before it is too late. Trust no one but me." Miss Marple glanced up sharply. "This sounds like a plea for help." "Yes, and there are more," Geraldine said, retrieving for a second letter. "Each one hints at some secret Lydia was desperate to reveal." Miss Marple's mind raced. If Hugo had been researching these letters, perhaps trying to uncover the truth about Lydia's disappearance, it might explain the parcels and his recent anxiety. "Geraldine, do you know where these letters came from originally?" They were sent from London, addressed to a Miss Lydia Tasker. I found a return address on one, an old manor on the outskirts of the city. Could this be a lead worth pursuing? Miss Marple mused. To find out who sent these letters. And why? Geraldine nodded, though unease flickered in her eyes. I think so, but I warn you, Miss Marple, some people in the village don't want this past dredged up. Thank you, Geraldine. You've been most helpful. Miss Marple carefully rewrapped the letters and tucked them into her handbag. As she left the post office, Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of a new lead. The letters were a tangible thread connecting the present mystery with the shadows of the past. She was certain the key to Hugo's murder lay somewhere within these fragile documents. Her next stop was the village pub, the King's Arms, where the villagers often gathered to exchange gossip and opinions. The air was thick with whispers about the investigation, and Miss Marple noted the way certain faces fell as she entered, an unspoken warning not to pry too deeply. She found Mrs. Edith Pottle sitting with her usual knitting, though today her hands trembled slightly. Miss Marple approached and took the empty seat beside her. Mrs. Pottle, she began gently, I've been given some old letters connected to the Taskers. Do you know who might have sent them? Edith hesitated, glancing nervously around. I can't say for sure, but there was always talk of a cousin, a Mr. Whitfield, who left the village years ago after a scandal. He was said to have dealings in London. Did he ever return? Once, briefly. He came back the year Lydia disappeared, but he left just as quickly. Some say he was the cause of her troubles. Miss Marple folded her hands. And the mill owner, Mr. Claremont. Do you think he might know more than he's letting on? Edith sighed. Arthur Claremont has always been secretive. Some believe he had a hand in covering up the past. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Constable Harris, who had been discreetly listening. Mrs. Marple, there's been a development. She followed the constable to the edge of the village, where a group of officers was gathered, near the old chestnut tree. The place was cordoned off, and a sense of tension hung in the air. One of the officers gestured toward the base of the tree, where a small wooden box had been unearthed. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, lay a bundle of papers and a tarnished locket. Miss Marple knelt down, examining the contents carefully. The papers were brittle, yellowed with age, but unmistakably maps, matching the descriptions Clive had given. The locket was opened, revealing a faded photograph of a young woman with sad eyes. Miss Marple's heart tightened. It was Lydia Tasker, who found this, she asked. A local boy, Tom Jennings. He was playing near the tree and noticed something sticking out of the earth. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the maps. They showed the layout of Nether Dean as it had been 50 years ago, with the mill prominently marked, along with several other landmarks long forgotten. This changes everything, she murmured. Do you think it could have led to Hugo's research? Constable Harris asked. Indeed, she replied. These maps might reveal the secret Hugo was so determined to uncover. As the crowd dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, deep in thought. The discovery tied the past to the present more tightly than ever. The chestnut tree, the letters, the mill, and the mysterious parcels, each was a piece of a larger puzzle. That evening, she returned home and laid out the papers and letters side by side. The number 13 was there again, inscribed on one of the maps near a forgotten boundary line. Miss Marple sat back, her fingers steepled. The village held secrets buried not just in time, but beneath the soil itself. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep them hidden. She resolved to visit the manor in London mentioned in the letters. Perhaps the person who sent them could shed light on Lydia's fate, and by extension, the motive for Hugo's murder. As night deepened, the wind whispered through the village, carrying with it the echoes of old secrets and new dangers. Miss Marple knew that in uncovering the past, she was stepping into a web of deceit that stretched far beyond Nether Dean. And yet she was ready. For as always, her keen eye and steady heart would guide her through the shadows to the truth. Miss Marple's journey to London was undertaken quietly, with her usual blend of purpose and discretion. She left Netherdean early one misty morning, taking the train that wound through the countryside, the familiar rolling fields giving way to the looming spires and smoky chimneys of the city. It was a world away from the village she knew so well, yet Miss Marple's eyes missed nothing, absorbing the nuances of city life as keenly as she did the subtle manners of her fellow villagers. The manor she sought was described in the letters as situated in the outskirts of a rather affluent London district, surrounded by an iron gate and towering hedges that promised privacy and old money. When she arrived, the building was imposing yet clearly showing the wear of time, ivy clinging to cracked stone walls, windows darkened by dust, and a sense of faded grandeur hanging about it. She rang the heavy brass bell and was answered by a middle-aged woman in simple but elegant attire. Introducing herself as Miss Marple, she explained her connection to Hugo Hawthorne and her interest in the letters addressed to Lydia Tasker. The woman's eyes flickered with recognition, but quickly masked any surprise. "I am Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield," she said, voice steady but with a hint of unease. "I was Lydia's cousin. I received those letters and kept them all these years." Invited inside, Miss Marple was led into a dimly lit sitting room filled with heavy furniture, shelves lined with old books, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors watching from gilded frames. Mrs. Whitfield poured tea with practiced hands, the delicate clink of china filling the quiet space. "It has been many years since anyone asked about Lydia," she began, settling into her chair. "Her disappearance was a wound that never healed." Miss Marple nodded gently. "Hugo was trying to understand what happened to her, but it seems he uncovered something dangerous. Could you tell me more about the circumstances surrounding Lydia's vanishing?" Mrs. Whitfield sighed, her gaze distant. "Lydia was restless, dear. She wanted to escape the confines of Netherdean and the shadows of our family name. But there were darker things at play. Old debts, bitter rivalries. Her father, Godfrey Tasker, was a man with many enemies, and not all in the village." Missy Marple leaned forward, attentive. "Enemies beyond Netherdean?" "Indeed. Business disputes, some linked to that old mill and others to a secret that Godfrey guarded jealously. Lydia stumbled upon something she should not have seen." "What kind of secret?" Miss Marple asked softly. Mrs. Whitfield hesitated, then lowered her voice. "It said Godfrey hid evidence of illegal dealings, smuggling, money laundering, using the mill as a front. When Lydia threatened to expose him, tensions escalated." Miss Marple's mind returned to Clive Claremont, and the maps found beneath the chestnut tree. The mill's role in the mystery was clearer now, but still incomplete. "Was there anyone else who might have wanted Lydia silenced?" she asked. Mrs. Whitfield's eyes narrowed. "Arthur Claremont was involved with my cousin's father, but their partnership soured. And then there was Whitfield himself, my late husband's uncle, a man whose greed knew no bounds." Miss Marple considered. "This. Do you know if Lydia ever confided in anyone outside the family?" "She spoke once of a stranger in the village, someone who seemed to know too much about her future," Mrs. Whitfield said. "But no one took her seriously. Perhaps this was the man Hugo called the guest who knew the future." The name sent a shiver through Miss Marple. It aligned perfectly with the mysterious visitor at the garden party, whose presence had unsettled so many. Before she could ask more, a soft knock interrupted them. A young man entered, a neatly dressed clerk with sharp eyes and an air of nervous urgency. "Mrs. Whitfield, there's a visitor asking to see you, one claiming to have urgent news about the Tasker family." Mrs. Whitfield's face paled. "Show him in." Miss Marple watched carefully as a tall, thin man stepped into the room. His eyes were piercing, his demeanor calm but intense. "I am Samuel Greaves," he said, bowing slightly. "I believe I can provide information that will clarify much of what you seek." Mrs. Whitfield regarded him warily. "What news do you bring, Mr. Greaves?" "I was a business associate of Godfrey Tasker," he explained. "Though our dealings were complicated, I have kept certain documents that may prove invaluable." He produced a small leather case, carefully unfastening it to reveal ledgers and papers, some marked with official seals. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed in interest as she studied the contents. The ledgers detailed suspicious transactions, payments to unknown parties, and coded entries referencing locations marked on the maps from Nether Dene. "Where did you find these?" she asked. "In a hidden compartment within the mill's office," Greaves replied. "I was returning to collect what was rightfully mine when I learned of the death." Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Mrs. Whitfield. "This is significant," she said. "It explains the lengths someone might go to keep the truth hidden." Greaves nodded. "And it also explains why Hugo was so intent on uncovering the past." The conversation deepened as Greaves shared what he knew of the family's entanglements and the broader conspiracy. As Miss Marple listened, she pieced together a picture of greed, betrayal, and desperation stretching from Nether Dene to London. Later, as she prepared to leave, Mrs. Whitfield grasped her hand. "Please be careful. Some who walk these halls and streets will stop at nothing to protect their secrets." Miss Marple smiled gently, masking the unease the warning had stirred within her. "Thank you. Your courage in speaking with me is the first step toward the truth." The journey back to Nether Dene was quiet, Miss Marple lost in thought. The threads of the mystery were unraveling, but each new discovery brought fresh danger. The shadow of the past was long, and those who had much to lose would fight to keep it hidden. Upon her return, the village felt different, charged with anticipation and suspicion. Miss Marple sensed the eyes of many upon her, some friendly, others not. Her thoughts turned to the maps and ledgers, the letters and locket, and the elusive guest who knew the future. She had uncovered the past's darker corners, but now the present's dangers were closing in. She resolved to tread carefully, watching and waiting for the smallest slip that would reveal the murderer's identity. For in Nether Dene, as in all villages, the most dangerous secrets were those kept behind polite smiles and whispered lies, and Miss Marple was determined to expose them all. The morning after Miss Marple's return to Nether Dene dawned with a grey sky and a fine drizzle, the kind of weather that seemed to dampen spirits as much as the ground. The village, however, was already abuzz with the latest developments. Rumours of the letters, the mysterious visitor, and the old mill's dark secrets swirled through the familiar streets like an uneasy wind, unsettling even the most steadfast residents. Miss Marple, ever observant, noted the change in atmosphere as she walked along the lane towards the village shop. Faces that had once greeted her with a polite nod now shifted quickly away, eyes darting furtively. Even the usually garrulous Mrs. Sims, who ran the post office, offered a terse "good morning" before retreating behind the counter, clearly reluctant to engage. She pondered the warning Mrs. Whitfield had given her, that there were those in Nether Dene who would go to great lengths to keep their secrets buried. As she entered the shop and purchased her daily newspaper, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted back to Samuel Greaves and the leather case of ledgers he had shown. The evidence was concrete, yet it was evident that many in the village preferred ignorance, or worse, denial. Miss Marple's attention was drawn by a sudden commotion outside the shop window. A small crowd was gathering near the village green, voices raised in a mixture of excitement and concern. She stepped out, curiosity piqued, and soon discerned the cause of the disturbance. On the cobbled pathway leading to the church, the local Constable was speaking with a young man, his face pale and tense. "What is it, Constable?" Miss Marple asked gently as she approached. The constable looked relieved to see her. "Miss Marple, I'm afraid there's been another incident. Mr. Arthur Claremont was found unconscious near the mill's entrance. Some say he was attacked. Others think he may have suffered a fall. But there's talk that it wasn't an accident." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The stakes had clearly risen. "Has he been taken to the doctor?" "Yes, the village doctor is tending to him now. It's too soon to tell how serious the injury is." As the crowd dispersed, whispering darkly, Miss Marple made her way to the mill. The building loomed even larger in the damp morning light, its broken windows and shuttered doors casting a ghostly silhouette. She studied the ground near the entrance, noting footprints muddied by rain, some overlapping, others distinct, signs of a struggle perhaps. The scene stirred memories of the maps and coded entries she had seen, of Lydia's disappearance and the tangled web of grudges and greed surrounding the place. Arthur Claremont was a key figure, his rivalry with the Taskers well known, and now he was a victim, or possibly a target. Miss Marple's next stop was the small cottage where the village doctor, Dr. Lennox, lived and worked. She found him in his surgery, a modest room lined with medical books and vials. "Doctor, I've heard of Mr. Claremont's condition. How is he?" Miss Marple inquired. Dr. Lennox looked up from his notes, his expression grave. "He's stable for now, but suffered a severe blow to the head. There are signs of external injury consistent with a fall or possibly an assault. He's unconscious, but breathing steadily." Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. "Has he spoken to anyone? Or do you expect him to recover fully?" "It's difficult to say. If he regains consciousness, we may get some answers, but the prognosis is uncertain. Head injuries can be unpredictable." She thanked the doctor and left with a growing sense of urgency. Arthur's condition could either solve the mystery or deepen it depending on what he remembered or failed to recall. Returning to the village, Miss Marple made her way to the inn where she knew some of the locals would be discussing the events. As she entered, the low murmur of conversation fell into silence, many eyes fixed on her. At a corner table sat Clive Claremont, his face pale and drawn, and beside him was Elsie Chapman, the innkeeper's daughter, who had seemed to know more than she admitted. Their whispered exchange ceased as Miss Marple approached. "Clive," she greeted gently, "how is your father?" Clive looked up, gratitude mingling with worry in his eyes. "No change yet, Miss Marple. We can only wait." Elsie, nervously fingering the edge of her apron, glanced between them. "If I might say, there's talk of strange visitors near the mill last night, people who don't belong here." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "That fits with what I have heard. Someone is trying to intimidate or silence those who know too much." Clive leaned in. "There's more. Last evening, a man was seen near the mill after dark, a figure in a long coat, moving quickly and looking about as if hiding something." Miss Marple's mind worked swiftly. "Did anyone get a good look at him?" "Only from a distance," Elsie admitted. "But he had a peculiar limp. A limp." That detail was significant. Miss Marple recalled a conversation with the vicar, who mentioned a visitor with a slight limp who had asked unusual questions during the garden party. "It seems our mysterious guest has returned," Miss Marple murmured, "and with a purpose far more sinister than mere curiosity." As the evening drew near, Miss Marple decided to revisit the mill, hoping to find overlooked clues. The rain had ceased, but the ground remained soft and muddy, perfect for leaving prints and traces. She circled the building, noting broken window panes and a side door slightly ajar. It was a door that led to the old office where the ledgers had been hidden. Careful not to disturb any evidence, she peered inside through the cracked door. Dust motes floated in the fading light, revealing a desk cluttered with papers and a single, recently used chair. Miss Marple spotted faint fingerprints on the surface, a smudge of dirt near the lock and a small scrap of fabric caught on the door handle. With practiced hands, she pocketed the scrap. The weave was coarse and dark, uncommon for most villagers, but consistent with the type of coat the witness had described. She knew the scrap could link the mysterious visitor to the scene, a vital piece in the growing puzzle. Back at Netherdean's modest police office, Miss Marple shared her findings with Constable Harris. The limp, the coat, the fabric, all point to someone trying to move unnoticed, yet leaving clues for those who know where to look. The constable nodded, though skepticism lingered in his eyes. Do you think this visitor might be responsible for attacking Mr. Claremont? It is a strong possibility, Miss Marple said, but we must be patient. The answers will come. As night fell over Netherdean, the village lay in uneasy silence. The case had deepened, revealing a darkness beneath its tranquil surface. Miss Marple, seated by her fireside, contemplated the intertwining threads of greed, fear, and desperation that bound the suspects and victims alike. She understood now that the mystery was not just about a lost woman or a damaged ledger. It was about the human heart and the secrets it guarded fiercely. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, and with them, the chance to untangle the web more fully. For in Netherdean, beneath the surface of everyday life, the truth waited patiently, ready to be uncovered by those with the eyes to see it. And Miss Marple had those eyes. The morning after the unsettling discovery at the mill arrived crisp and clear, the sun casting long shadows over Netherdean's cobblestones. Despite the bright day, a heaviness clung to the village air, as though the recent events had unsettled its very foundation. Miss Marple sat quietly in her parlour, her knitting basket resting idly on her lap, but her mind was anything but idle. The fragment of dark fabric, the limp described by witnesses, the attack on Arthur Claremont, all these pieces formed an intricate pattern she was determined to decipher. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Constable Harris, who knocked, gently before entering. Miss Marple, there's been some news. Mr. Claremont has regained consciousness, though he is weak and confused. The doctor suggested I bring you to see him. He wished to speak with you alone. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. She rose, steady and composed, and followed Harris to the small, sparsely furnished room where Arthur lay propped against pillows. His face was pale, but there was a flicker of life in his eyes that had been absent the day before. Mr. Claremont, she began gently, I'm glad to see you awake. How do you feel? He managed a faint smile, though it did not reach his eyes. Thank you, Miss Marple. It's all rather foggy. I don't remember much from last night, only a shadow, a voice, and a sudden blow. I fear I was targeted. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze steady. Do you recall if the voice was familiar? Arthur hesitated, then said, It was low, cautious. Whoever it was, they wanted me frightened. They mentioned the ledgers, said I should stop looking into them. That is most important, Miss Marple said softly. Did you recognize the person? No, but they had a limp, a pronounced limp on the left leg. The constable glanced at Miss Marple, who allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Thank you, Mr. Claremont. Rest now. You've been through much. Once the constable had escorted the doctor in to tend Arthur, Miss Marple sat back, letting her mind weave the new threads into the tapestry. A visitor with a limp, a warning to cease the investigation, and a brutal assault. The stakes were higher than ever. She recalled the conversation at the inn, Elsie Chapman's whispered mention of the man in the long coat, the scrap of fabric matching the description. There was more at play here than mere village rivalry. This was a deliberate attempt to conceal something dangerous. Later that morning, Miss Marple made her way to the vicarage, seeking the counsel of Reverend Preston, a man whose calm demeanour often provided clarity in troubled times. The vicar welcomed her with warmth, though his eyes betrayed concern. "I gather things have become quite serious," he said quietly. "The attack on Mr. Claremont has unsettled many." "It has indeed," Miss Marple agreed, "and it seems the shadow that hung over Lydia Tasker's disappearance stretches far wider than we first believed." Reverend Preston nodded thoughtfully. "I have always suspected there was more to the story. The Taskers were a proud family, but their fortunes and secrets were entwined with many in the village. Such pride often conceals resentment." Miss Marple glanced toward the window, where the village churchyard lay bathed in sunlight. "Do you know of anyone who might benefit from Lydia's absence, or from keeping the ledgers hidden?" The vicar hesitated before replying. "There are whispers of old debts, of land disputes, and of alliances forged in the shadows. One name that comes up is Reginald Forsyth. He was once a business partner of Samuel Greaves, but they parted ways under less than amicable circumstances." "Reginald Forsyth," Miss Marple repeated, filing the name carefully away. "Has he been in the village recently?" "Not that I am aware of, but his family estate is just beyond the woods. The Forsyths keep to themselves." With this new lead, Miss Marple thanked the vicar and set off towards the edge of the village, where the Forsyth estate lay hidden behind tall hedges and wrought iron gates. As she approached, she noticed a figure pacing near the gate, a man. With a deliberate limp, his coat collar turned up against the chill. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Was this the mysterious visitor? She approached calmly, her demeanour that of a harmless village lady rather than an investigator closing in. "Good morning," she said pleasantly. "I was hoping to speak with Mr. Forsyth." The man turned, his face sharp and pale. "I'm Reginald Forsyth, and you are?" "Miss Marple," she replied with a faint smile. "I understand you once had business with Mr. Greaves and might know more about the ledgers found at the old mill." Forsyth's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Those matters are long past and best left forgotten. The village should not dwell on old grievances." "Yet someone seems very eager to keep those grievances buried," Miss Marple said quietly, watching his reaction. Forsyth's jaw tightened, and he took a step back. "I am no threat to anyone," he said firmly. "If you are here to stir up trouble, I suggest you leave." Miss Marple nodded, undeterred. "I only seek the truth, Mr. Forsyth. The village deserves to know what lies beneath its surface." Forsyth's gaze darkened. "Be careful, Miss Marple. Some truths come with a price." She left the estate with a new sense of urgency. Forsyth was clearly connected to the mystery, and his defensiveness suggested secrets worth uncovering. That afternoon, she returned to the inn, where a small group had gathered to discuss the latest news. The atmosphere was tense, voices hushed. Elsie approached her cautiously. "Miss Marple, I overheard something. The mill's caretaker, old Mr. Jenkins, was seen arguing with Mr. Claremont the day before the attack." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "Do you know what the argument was about?" Elsie shook her head. "No, but it looked heated. Mr. Jenkins is usually quiet, but that day he seemed angry." Miss Marple thanked her and made her way to the caretaker's modest cottage near the mill. The door opened before she could knock, and there stood Mr. Jenkins, a wiry man with sharp eyes. "I hear you wish to speak with me about Mr. Claremont," he said gruffly. "Yes, Mr. Jenkins. I understand you had a disagreement recently." Jenkins hesitated, then sighed. "We argued about the mill's future. Claremont wants to sell, but I want it preserved. There's history here, and I fear what might be lost." Was there more to it? Did the argument get out of hand? "Not at all," Jenkins replied, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. "I wouldn't hurt Arthur." Miss Marple studied him carefully. "You don't believe the attack was accidental?" Jenkins shook his head. No. Someone wanted to send a message, but I don't know who or why. As she left, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the letters Lydia had sent. Warnings and cryptic clues hinting at dangers no one wanted to face. The pieces were beginning to coalesce. Business rivalries, personal grudges, a visitor with a limp, and a desperate attempt to silence those seeking the truth. As dusk settled, Miss Marple stood by her window, watching Nether bathed in twilight. Somewhere in that peaceful village lurked a darkness, but she was closer than ever to illuminating it. The true test would soon come, not merely in uncovering the facts, but in understanding the hearts that concealed them. The morning mist lingered over Nether, softening the outlines of cottages and the village green, yet Miss Marple's thoughts were sharp and unyielding. The day promised little in the way of distractions, and she welcomed the quiet as an opportunity to delve deeper into the puzzle that had unsettled her peaceful village. The attack on Arthur Claremont, the missing Lydia Tasker, the mysterious visitor with the limp, each thread woven into a tapestry of secrets and lies. Miss Marple sat at her writing desk, reviewing the notes she had taken over the past days. She thought of Reginald Forsyth's sudden defensiveness and the strange warning he had issued. The conversation with Mr. Jenkins, the caretaker, lingered in her mind, especially his concern for the mill and his heated argument with Arthur. And then there were Lydia's letters, so carefully worded, hinting at danger, yet leaving so much unsaid. Her musings were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Inspector Craddock, looking grave but respectful. "Miss Marple, I hope. I'm not intruding," he said, stepping inside. "There's been a development." Miss Marple gestured to a chair. "Please, do sit. I was just reviewing the facts. What news do you bring?" The inspector sighed and took his seat. "We found a letter in the mill, tucked inside one of the ledgers. It's addressed to you, actually, from Lydia Tasker." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose in surprise. "For me? That's unexpected. May I see it?" He handed her the carefully folded paper. The handwriting was elegant, the ink slightly faded. "Dear Miss Marple," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I have been silenced or am in grave danger. There are truths in Nether too perilous to speak aloud, but I trust your wisdom and discretion. The ledgers hold the key to a long-hidden betrayal, one that reaches deeper than you imagine. Beware those who limp, for they carry more than wounds. I had hoped to tell you more, but time has run out. Please find the courage to uncover what others wish to keep buried. Yours sincerely, Lydia." Miss Marple folded the letter gently, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "This confirms what I suspected. Lydia knew she was in danger, and she reached out in the only way she could." Inspector Craddock nodded. "I agree. But it raises questions. Why would she trust you? And who did she mean by those who limp?" "Indeed," Miss Marple said quietly. "There are layers yet to uncover. I intend to revisit the mill and examine the ledgers with fresh eyes. Perhaps they contain more than accounts, maybe clues hidden in plain sight." The inspector looked concerned. "Miss Marple, with all due respect, the police have been eager to close the case. Arthur Claremont's attacker remains unidentified, but they see it as an isolated incident. Your involvement complicates matters." "Complications are often necessary," Miss Marple replied with a faint smile. "Justice is not served by rushing to conclusions." Craddock hesitated, but knew better than to argue. "Very well. I'll arrange for you to visit the mill under supervision." As he left, Miss Marple prepared herself for the visit. She dressed modestly, her hat pinned neatly, and took with her the letter and a small notebook. The mill stood silent and imposing on the outskirts of the village, its worn stones whispering stories of the past. Inside, the air was cool and musty. Miss Marple's keen eyes scanned the room, lingering on the ledgers stacked neatly on a wooden table. With the constable's permission, she began to leaf through the pages. Numbers and figures filled the sheets, but patterns soon emerged: payments, debts, and unusual transactions that did not align with the mill's normal business. Then, something caught her eye, an entry with a name that had not been mentioned before: Edmund Hargrave. The name was scrawled next to a large sum, dated shortly before Lydia's disappearance. Miss Marple frowned. Who is Edmund Hargrave? She wondered aloud. Later, in the village post office, she inquired discreetly and discovered that Edmund Hargrave was a reclusive gentleman who owned property near the river. Rumours whispered of a bitter dispute with several villagers over land boundaries and water rights. Intrigued, Miss Marple decided a visit was warranted. The Hargrave estate was a modest manor surrounded by thick hedges and ancient oaks. A butler answered her knock, leading her into a drawing room where Edmund awaited, a tall man with a stern expression and restless eyes. "Miss Marple, I presume," he said, rising. "What brings you here?" She explained her interest in the ledgers and Lydia's disappearance, carefully gauging his reaction. Hargrave's face darkened. "I had no dealings with Lydia Tasker beyond some business arrangements, nothing that should concern anyone." Miss Marple observed the subtle tension in his hands as he spoke. "Sometimes, Mr. Hargrave, the smallest dealings have the deepest consequences." Hargrave's gaze hardened. "I assure you, I am no villain in this tale." As the conversation progressed, Miss Marple noticed the faintest limp in his left leg. Barely perceptible, but there. After leaving the manor, she pondered the significance of this discovery. The limp, the land disputes, the mysterious entries in the ledger, all converging threads. That evening, the village buzzed with new rumours. At the local tea shop, villagers speculated wildly about Lydia's fate, Arthur's attack, and the possible involvement of the Hargraves or Forsyths. Miss Marple listened quietly, her mind piecing together motives and opportunities. A sudden knock on her door startled her from her thoughts. Standing there was Elsie Chapman, eyes wide with urgency. "Miss Marple, I overheard something at the inn. They're talking about a second crime. Someone broke into the vicarage last night." Miss Marple frowned. "The vicarage? What was taken?" "Nothing." "Obvious, but Reverend Preston found his study ransacked, papers scattered, books pulled from shelves. It looks like someone was searching for something." The thought of the vicarage being targeted deepened the mystery. What could be so important that it compelled a thief to risk exposure? Miss Marple decided she must visit Reverend Preston at once. Upon arrival, she found the vicar calm, but clearly unsettled. "Miss Marple?" he greeted her. "Yes, someone did break in. Nothing was taken that I could identify, but the disorder is troubling. I keep journals and correspondence that relate to the village's history, but nothing appears. Missing." Miss Marple's eyes scanned the room carefully. "Sometimes the act of searching sends a message as loud as the theft itself." The vicar nodded slowly. "Indeed. I suspect the same people who wish to keep the past buried are growing desperate." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Then we must be more vigilant. The answers lie not in force but in understanding the hearts involved." As the evening drew to a close, Miss Marple sat once more by her window, the night air cool against the glass. The village, still cloaked in darkness, held its secrets close, but she felt the tide turning. The footprints of truth were faint but unmistakable. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more shadows, and the subtle dance of revelation and deception. Yet Miss Marple's gentle but unyielding presence would see that the light of justice found its way through the thickest fog. And in that quiet determination lay the hope that Netherdean would soon find peace once more. The morning sun filtered softly through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's sitting room, casting a gentle glow over the scattered papers and half-filled teacups from the night before. The village of Netherdean was waking with a sense of cautious anticipation. the unease from recent events still hanging in the air like a stubborn fog refusing to lift. Miss Marple herself was already at her writing desk, mind racing through the strands of the mystery that had grown steadily more complex with each passing day. Her thoughts returned once more to Lydia's letter, the cryptic warning about those who limp, and the unexpected figure of Edmund Hargrave. There was something about the man, something just beneath the surface, that had unsettled her. His manner was controlled, but his eyes betrayed a restless anxiety, as if he carried a secret far heavier than a mere business dispute. The land, quarrels, the strange ledger entries, the attack on Arthur Claremont, all were threads in a tapestry woven tightly by hidden resentments and old grudges. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. It was Constable Bennet, his expression grave but respectful. "Miss Marple, the vicar has asked to see you. He believes he has found something of importance in his study." Miss Marple nodded, gathering her shawl and notebook. "Lead the way, Bennet." The vicarage was just down the lane, its white walls gleaming in the morning light. Reverend Preston greeted her with a weary smile, but his eyes held a spark of urgency. "Thank you for coming so promptly, Miss Marple. After the break-in, I have been reviewing my papers carefully. There was one letter that caught my attention, one I had not noticed before." He handed her a folded piece of parchment, aged and yellowed. The handwriting was hurried but clear. "To those who seek truth, beware the eyes that watch from shadows. The past is not as buried as it seems." Miss Marple read the note slowly, a chill running down her spine despite the warmth of the room. "Did you recognize the handwriting?" The vicar shook his head. "No, and I fear whoever left this wishes to warn or threaten. It suggests someone close to the village knows more than they admit." Miss Marple's gaze swept the room, landing on the shelves of old books and manuscripts. "Has anyone else had access to your study recently?" "Only the usual parish council members," he replied, "but I shall speak with them at once. The timing of the break-in, so close to Arthur's attack and Lydia's disappearance, cannot be coincidence." The day unfolded with a series of visits and quiet inquiries. Miss Marple met with various villagers, each encounter peeling back another layer of the village's complex web. At the bakery, she found Mrs. Dalton, whose sharp tongue was tempered by a kind heart. "I don't like it, Miss Marple," she said, wringing her flour-dusted hands. "There's more going on here than anyone wants to admit. Lydia was a good girl, but she had enemies." "And what sort of enemies?" Miss Marple inquired gently. Mrs. Dalton leaned closer. "Old grudges, mostly. Family feuds that go back years. There's talk of money owed, land stolen, promises broken. The Hargraves, the Forsyths, they've never been on friendly terms." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mrs. Dalton. Your insight is invaluable." Later, at the village inn, she caught sight of Reginald Forsyth nursing a glass of sherry in a dim corner. His eyes darted nervously when he noticed her. "Approach." "Mr. Forsyth," she began, "I wonder if we might speak about your dealings with Mr. Claremont and the late Miss Tasker." He stiffened, setting down his glass with a slight tremor. "I've told the police all I know. I had nothing to do with whatever's happened." "But you were quite concerned when you saw Lydia's letter," she pressed. "And you warned—" "Me to be careful." Forsyth's face paled. "I was trying to protect you. There are people here who would stop at nothing." Miss Marple allowed the silence to deepen. "Do you believe Edmund Hargrave is one of them?" Forsyth hesitated. "Edmund, he's dangerous, but so are others. This village holds many secrets." As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to Arthur Claremont. His attack, violent and unprovoked, had seemed random at first, but now it was clear it was a message, a warning cloaked in brutality. Who stood to gain from silencing him? Her attention was drawn back to the mill ledgers and the strange payments to Edmund Hargrave. Could Hargrave have sought to cover a debt or buy silence? Or was there something more personal, a grudge born of years of simmering resentment? That evening she took a solitary walk along the riverbank, the gentle rush of water calming yet sharpening her senses. The river had long been a lifeline for Netherdean, but now it felt like a boundary between truth and deception, between the village's calm surface and the turbulent secrets beneath. Lost in thought, Miss Marple did not notice the figure approaching until a voice called softly behind her, "Miss Marple." She turned to see Inspector Craddock, his face shadowed but resolute. "We've had another incident," he said grimly. "Lydia Tasker's body was found this morning, just beyond the old mill." The news hit her like a blow, yet her mind worked, swiftly, assessing the implications. "Was it murder, Inspector?" "Evidence suggests so. The coroner found signs of strangulation. It's clear she was killed shortly after the attack on Arthur Claremont." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "This confirms that the danger is far greater than we feared. The killer is desperate to silence those who know too much." Craddock nodded. "We'll need your help, Miss Marple. The village is on edge." Together they returned to the mill, where a small crowd had gathered. Among them, faces pale with shock and suspicion, the villagers whispered and speculated. Miss Marple's gaze swept the crowd, noting the subtle shifts in expression, the flicker of guilt, the shadow of fear, the mask of innocence. She approached the body with reverence, careful not to disturb the scene. Lydia's face was serene in death, as if she had found peace at last. But the truth of her fate stirred a storm of questions. What had Lydia discovered? What had she meant by warning Miss Marple? And who among these familiar faces was capable of such ruthless violence? As dusk settled, Miss Marple stood silent, a steady pillar amid the storm. The village of Netherdean was fractured, its secrets laid bare but still tangled. Yet she knew that with patience and subtle insight, the threads would come together. The final act was approaching, and the truth long hidden in shadows would soon step into the light. Miss Marple gathered the villagers in the drawing-room of St. Mary's Rectory, the familiar space now heavy with tension and expectation. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the faces of those gathered, friends, neighbors, and suspects alike. She stood quietly, a picture of gentle composure, her sharp eyes observing every twitch, every glance, every subtle movement. "Thank you all for coming," she began softly. "I know these past days have been difficult, but I believe it is time to bring clarity to the shadows that have unsettled Netherdean." Her voice held no accusation, only calm certainty. She first recounted the key events, careful to present each detail without judgment. The garden party, where the first unease was felt, Lydia Tasker's ominous letter, the attack on Arthur Claremont, and finally Lydia's tragic death near the old mill. She spoke of the broken relationships, the land disputes, and the hidden resentments that had long festered beneath the village's peaceful surface. Then, turning to the peculiar ledger entries and the mysterious figure of Edmund Hargrave, Miss Marple explained how the outward appearances of business rivalry concealed a far more personal vendetta. Mr. Hargrave's financial dealings were indeed troubling, but it was not he who struck the fatal blow. Her gaze rested on Reginald Forsyth, whose uneasy shifting betrayed the weight of his conscience. "It was you, Mr. Forsyth, who feared that the revelations Lydia and Arthur threatened to bring to light would destroy your carefully built life. You alone had both motive and opportunity." She detailed how Lydia's discovery of forged land, deeds linked to Forsyth's family, could have undone years of fraud, and how Arthur, ever loyal to truth, had been silenced when he confronted Forsyth. The attack on Arthur was a brutal warning, but Lydia's persistence in uncovering the truth led to her murder. Forsyth's mask cracked. He rose, voice trembling, caught between denial and confession. I never meant it was supposed to stop them. I was desperate. Miss Marple nodded gently. Desperation often clouds judgment, Mr. Forsyth. But truth, as you see, has a way of finding its way through the darkest of lies. The villagers listened, stunned, but relieved. The mystery that had cast a pall over their lives was laid bare, not with grand spectacle, but with the quiet power of insight and understanding. As the evening drew to a close, life in Nether Dean slowly returned to its gentle rhythms, though the shadow of the past lingered still. Miss Marple, alone once more in her cosy sitting room, reflected quietly on the fragile nature of human character, how the smallest of grievances could ignite the deadliest of fires, and how the deepest truths were often hidden in the unlikeliest places. With a soft sigh, she reached for her knitting, her thoughts already turning to the next puzzle waiting patiently in the wings.